I don't want a frail, needy old woman in this house while I'm pregnant, Sienna said, still scrolling her phone like I was a notification she could swipe away. My son, Noah, didn't even look at me. He just nodded, and whatever was left of my heart sounded like a bottle shattering on tile. You should find a new place to live, Mom. Matter of fact. Weather report tone. Not the voice you used to exile the person who taught you to tie your shoes. 6 months earlier I'd sold my sunny little bungalow on Birch Lane. I told myself it was for family. I told the realtor I was excited for the next chapter. I told the cashier at the grocery store that moving into my son's studio suite would be cozy. I told lie after lie because the truth, that I was terrified, felt like admitting I had finally become disposable. I cooked their dinners. I folded their laundry warm from the dryer and smoothed the corners flat the way Noah liked when he was 5. I even helped wire the dimmer switches in the studio, muscle memory from decades of fixing things beside my late husband. Sienna's pregnancy was rough, and I just kept stepping in, thinking usefulness would equal belonging. But the longer I stayed, the more I felt myself shrinking. Careful footsteps, quiet cupboards, my laugh pressed thin. When Sienna finally looked up and said, "We need the space for the nursery, Eloise," she didn't say it cruelly. She said it like scheduling a delivery. And Noah, the boy who used to cry if I was late to school pickup, said there were nice senior communities. As if I needed to be parked next to a shuffleboard court because I turned 65 last winter. I swallowed the scream lodged behind my ribs. "All right," I said. "Come." Pleasant. A voice that didn't belong to a woman's splintering. I promised I'd be out by the weekend. Sienna smiled, a neat, relieved smile. Noah rested a hand on my shoulder like he'd done something merciful. I walked back to the studio, shut the door, and let a different smile spread. Small, steady, secret. They had no idea what I'd already set in motion. 3 days later, a moving truck backed into the driveway on Rosemont Lane. Sienna watched from the kitchen window. Her reflection hovered in the glass, face pinched, regret or suspicion I couldn't tell. Noah stepped onto the porch in a stained work shirt, eyes bruised by sleep he hadn't caught. "You found a place that fast?" he asked, as if I were supposed to be helpless without his permission. "It's amazing what you can do when you're motivated," I said, sweet as tea. The studio had been never mine. The new apartment, 2nd floor, light pooling on the hardwood, a kitchen that clicked when the burner caught, belonged to me the way bones belong to bodies. As the movers carried boxes labeled with my looping hand, I tucked away another truth they didn't deserve. I hadn't been waiting to be thrown out. I'd been preparing to walk. 2 weeks earlier, when Sienna's tone shifted from tight gratitude to casual command, I'd dialed a number written on the back of a grocery receipt. Adrian Cole, Cole and Rowan Properties. He had a way of talking about neighborhoods like they were sleeping giants. Streets poised to wake, stretch, and double the price of everything. He was already buying on the east side, already mapping the arteries of the city's next new thing. During our first conversation, I mentioned a block near the river with homes that had been creatively renovated. His interest sharpened. "Tell me more." By the time I turned the studio key in for the last time, I'd signed a part-time contract as a property assessment consultant. Flexible hours, decent pay, and a chance to use the knowledge I'd spent 40 years quietly collecting. It felt like rearranging a chessboard I'd been losing on for years. The added sweetness? One of the addresses on Adrian's shortlist was 218 Rosemont Lane. When my phone rang that afternoon, I sat in my new living room and let the sun warm my knees. "Ms. Eloise Hart?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Naomi Park from Cole and Rowan. We're confirming your start date and the priority inspections, beginning with Rosemont." I set the phone on speaker, lifted a glass, and toasted my reflection in the window. "To new beginnings," I whispered. "And to the people who taught me exactly how to make them." Adrian Cole looked like the kind of man whose shoes never touched puddles. Mid-40s, sharp suit, a smile that said the wind always blew his way. We met at a cafe 3 blocks from Rosemont. He slid a tablet between us, parcels shaded in elegant blues, dotted lines crawling like veins. "Eloise, your neighborhood notes are surgical. We're not collecting houses, we're curating a district." He didn't say gentrification. He said renewal. He didn't say displacement. He said upgrading tax base. I listened without flinching. I've lived long enough to know that progress and grief travel together. "And 218 Rosemont?" he asked. I sipped coffee and chose my words. Young owners. First-timers. Stretched. The lower level was converted to living space, but I doubt there's a paper trail. Not a lie. Noah's friend had framed those walls on a Saturday with a borrowed nail gun and a YouTube tutorial. Cosmetic aging, electrical quirks, mid-tier windows. Plenty to fix, plenty to gain. Adrian's stylist tapped the screen, a precise heartbeat. Cash offer. Quick close. We can make it painless. When we walked up the drive later that morning, clipboard in my hand, a neutral smile stitched to my face, Sienna's shadow crossed the curtains. Noah opened the door. Confusion arrived first, then the slow dawning that rewrites history. His mother, the woman he'd escorted to the edge of his life, standing beside a man who made neighborhoods disappear and reappear like card tricks. Mr. Hart, Adrian said smoothly, offering a card. Adrian Cole and Rowan Properties. This is Ms. Hart, my property assessment consultant. The title slid through the room like a knife wrapped in velvet. Noah's eyes ping-ponged between my face and the embossed logo. Sienna appeared behind him, her belly leading, her gaze a storm narrowing. You know each other? Adrian asked, the way smart men ask questions they already understand. Sienna is my daughter-in-law, I said lightly. Was, Sienna corrected under her breath, as if the word could absolve her. I didn't blink. May we come in? Adrian asked. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and last night's argument. I sat in a chair I'd never been invited to sit in before. Adrian spread documents across their coffee table, numbers that made hope and fear sit shoulder to shoulder. 460,000, he said. Cash. 30-day close. We'll handle inspections. Sienna's inhale was a tiny gasp. They'd bought at 412 with my $40,000 bridge. Noah's mouth opened shut. We're not selling, he managed. Of course, Adrian said. But you should know. The city approved infrastructure work for this corridor. Utilities, fiber, sidewalks, storm drains. Construction will be immersive. And during permitting, unpermitted modifications in adjacent homes get flagged. His tone was gentle. The implications were not. I kept my face pastoral. Inside, the clock began to count down. We left them with a business card and a deadline. Friday. Outside on the porch, mist lifted off the river and the world smelled like rain waiting its turn. I said, take care, like a woman who believed everything worked out for the best. My phone buzzed before I reached the curb. Noah. Declined. Sienna. Declined. No again. I answered, already unwrapping a tea bag. Mom, what is this? His voice pitched high, the sound of a man who suddenly realizes consequences have a shape. Mr. Cole is talking about tearing up the entire block. He's talking about repairing it, I said, stirring honey into heat. Higher values are wonderful for people who can sell. We don't want to sell. We just bought this house. The old pleading note threaded his words, the same one he used at 8 when he'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. With my money, I reminded him. 40,000 I will never see again. Silence. I know we hurt you, he said finally. Hurt implies accident, I replied. You and Sienna made a decision. You called me a burden and pushed me out the door you bought with my name on the loan application. Don't make this about feelings, he snapped, then softened. Sienna was stressed. The pregnancy. Don't drag a baby in as a shield, I said, steel threading the words. She showed me who she is. You agreed with her. An hour later there was a pounding at my apartment door. Through the peephole, Sienna, mascara carving dark commas under her eyes. I opened the door but left my hand on the chain. Please. No preamble. Raw voice. I was wrong. I said awful things. But you can't destroy our lives because I was mean. I studied her. The woman who had booked dinners without me, planned holidays without me, turned conversations into glass walls I could only press my palms against. Is that what you call it? I asked. Mean. We're family, she said, breath hitching. Family forgives. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't throw each other away. Her expression collapsed, the scaffolding of certainty finally giving out. What do you want? How do we fix this? I let the question hang so long the hallway hummed. You can't unring a bell, I said at last. But there's a fair offer on the table. Take it, start fresh somewhere you can afford. Or stay and invite the city into your walls? Her hand flew to her belly. Fear flickered. Anger tried to follow. And then, like weather, something else moved in. Understanding. You did this, she whispered. I stopped preventing it, I answered. The difference filled the space between us like a locked door. Noah arrived 10 minutes later, keys jangling like handcuffs. He didn't knock, he thudded. I unlatched the chain and stepped back. He barreled in, gaze ricocheting. Sienna says you admitted you set this up. I admitted no such thing, I said. Adrian was coming whether I lived in your studio or on the moon. I just stopped standing in front of the train. What does that even mean? I pulled a manila folder from a kitchen drawer, paper I'd hoped to keep forever unopened. 6 weeks ago, I said, laying the first page on the table, the Municipal Development Oversight Unit sent notices. Pre-assessment. Code checks before the infrastructure project. These went to every address on your block. We never got a notice, he said, panic widening his eyes. It went to the prior owner who forwarded it to the realtor who called me because my funds show on your mortgage. Do you remember when I asked about permits for that conversion? I had a contractor lined up. We could have fixed it, $8,000 in 2 weeks of dust. I planned to pay for it as a parting gift. I planned to leave you ready. I tapped the schedule stapled to the back. Next Tuesday. Sienna sank onto a chair. The sound she made was small and animal. But you moved out. After you asked me to, I said, softer than I felt. After you drew a bright line and shoved me behind it. Can you still fix it? Noah asked. He looked both older and younger than his 35 years. Stubble, tremor, the hurt hopefulness of a boy who has finally found out the world is not made of pillows. No, I said. It was the first time the word felt like a blessing. The cost of the lesson is due. The days that followed bled equal parts theater and prayer. Noah left a note under my door, the paper trembling where he'd held it. You're the strongest person I know. Please fix this. Sienna texted one word. Please. I didn't reply. Adrian called to say they'd asked about payment plans. Could they spread compliance over months? The city's clock said no. The mortgage officer phoned me next, voice buttered with concern, explaining that a home equity line was blocked by documentation irregularities. And then there were Sienna's parents at my threshold, Gerald and Marianne Pierce, pressed and polite, arriving with a story where I was the villain who wanted a nursery more than privacy. I made coffee. I laid out the notices, the estimates, the exact words spoken the night I became disposable. Marianne went white at useless. Gerald's jaw locked. We raised her better, he muttered. Maybe they had. Maybe comfort had done the rest. What would it take to fix the family? Marianne asked, careful, hands folded around the warm mug like it could bless her with an answer. Some things don't fix, I said, not unkind. Outside, rain stitched the afternoon to the windows. Inside, the truth found its shape. But people can learn. They left with their umbrellas and a promise to talk to their daughter. I stood in the quiet and realized my chest felt strangely light, as if a heavy coat had slipped from my shoulders without me noticing. When the phone rang again, Adrian, then later a city investigator with sharp questions and sharper ears, I told the truth. I had not arranged the storm. I had simply stopped holding up the sky by myself. The call came on a gray Monday morning. Adrian's voice, usually smooth and composed, carried an edge. Eloise, we've hit turbulence. Someone filed a complaint with city planning, claiming Cole and Rowan are intimidating residents into selling. My blood cooled. Who? I asked, though the answer hovered like a ghost at the edge of thought. Gerald Pierce, Adrian said. Apparently he's got ties at City Hall. Former council member. The city's launching an investigation. They'll want to speak with you. I lowered into my armchair slowly, as if moving too fast might crack the floor beneath me. Gerald, Sienna's father, the man who had sat in my apartment drinking coffee, listening with solemn eyes while I unfolded the truth, had turned the table. Maybe he thought he was protecting his daughter. Maybe he thought loyalty excused betrayal. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. A sharp, clear voice introduced herself as Detective Lin Chen from the City Planning Compliance Office. She asked if I could meet that afternoon. It wasn't a request. The conference room at City Hall smelled faintly of paper and bleach. Detective Chen was younger than I'd expected, late 30s maybe, with a stare that pinned me like a butterfly under glass. "Mrs. Hart," she began, "can you explain your relationship with Cole and Rowan?" I straightened my spine. "I'm a property consultant. I assess neighborhood conditions and identify opportunities for development." "And your connection to 218 Rosemont Lane?" "That address belongs to my son and daughter-in-law," I said, voice steady though my pulse throbbed in my ears. "They asked me to move out. Afterwards I accepted work with Mr. Cole. I provided factual information about properties in the area, including Rosemont." She tapped her pen. "Some would view that as revenge." I held her gaze. "Some would view my son's actions as elder abuse. I sold my home to help him only to be discarded when I was inconvenient. The city documented the violations long before I ever spoke to Mr. Cole. I didn't create problems. I simply stopped hiding them." Her pen stilled. The room vibrated with silence, the kind that could topple either way. The interview stretched for 2 hours. Detective Chin combed through every detail: when I received the notice, what steps I'd taken to correct the violations, why I hadn't informed Noah and Sienna after moving out. When it ended, she escorted me to the door. "Off the record, Mrs. Hart, family disputes like this rarely end cleanly." "Off the record," I said, "sometimes people only learn through consequences, even when those people are family." 3 sleepless nights followed. Every creak of the pipes in my apartment sounded like the knock of officials at my door. I kept rehearsing my defense as though I were on trial for loving my son too much and finally refusing to be used. Then Adrian called. His voice was calm this time, lighter almost. The city concluded their review. No fraud. No coercion. They determined all our practices were legitimate. Your consulting role was deemed appropriate. Relief slammed through me so suddenly I nearly dropped the phone. And the complaint? Withdrawn. Gerald called this morning to apologize for wasting the city's time. Apparently, he and Marianne had some hard conversations with Sienna. I laughed, short, sharp, unbelieving. The man who had accused us of unethical tactics was now retracting everything. Maybe Marianne's pale face when I'd told her the truth had done more damage than she realized. That afternoon my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Noah and Sienna, both hollow-eyed as if the week had aged them a decade. Their knock wasn't demanding this time. It was hesitant, a child's knock. I opened the door but blocked the entry with my body. "Mom," Noah said quietly, "we owe you an apology." Sienna's lips trembled. "Several apologies." I waited. Let the silence press against them like a mirror they couldn't escape. They were finally here, not as conquerors, not as landlords, but as supplicants. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to let them inside. Sienna's voice cracked first. "My parents told us what you did. How you tried to protect us. How you were fixing everything, paying for permits, handling the city." Her hand pressed her belly, protective even in shame. "And we threw it away." Noah swallowed hard. "We threw you away." I looked at my son. His face was leaner, his eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. The boy who once clung to my hand crossing streets now stood before me, begging for mercy. "Yes," I said simply. "You did. Can you forgive us?" Sienna whispered. The question burned. Forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's a mountain climb, and sometimes the summit doesn't exist. "I can forgive," I said carefully. "But I can't forget what you showed me about who you are when cruelty felt safe." "We want to make it right," Noah said desperately. "How?" They glanced at each other, blank with helplessness. "We don't know," Sienna admitted. "Then you can't fix what you broke," I said. "But you can learn." Noah's eyes filled. "Does that mean, is there any chance we can be family again?" I considered them, their remorse, their weakness, their rawness. Perhaps pain had finally humbled them. "Maybe," I said. "But it would be different. A family built on respect, not convenience. A family where my worth isn't tied to my usefulness." Hope flickered in Noah's gaze, fragile as a candle. "But understand this," I said firmly. "The next time stress tempts you, Sienna, will you turn on me again? And Noah, the next time you must choose between your wife's comfort and your mother's dignity, which will you choose?" Their mouths opened, closed, silence their only answer. "Think about it," I said. "When you have honest answers, call me." I shut the door gently, leaving them on the other side with their ghosts. 2 weeks later, 218 Rosemont sold for $460,000. After paying off the mortgage and closing costs, they cleared $65,000. Not the fortune they'd hoped for, but enough to buy a smaller house across town. One they could manage without anyone else's sacrifice. The day of the move, I stood at my window and watched the moving truck rumble away. Relief mingled with grief. They were no longer tethered to the home I'd once helped them build. Perhaps that was best. A month later, Sienna gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Lila, after Sienna's grandmother, not me. I didn't expect otherwise. But when I visited the hospital, Noah held the tiny bundle out to me with trembling hands. "She needs her grandma," he said softly. I cradled her, inhaled the sweet milky scent of her skin, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Lila blinked at me, her fist curling around my finger. She didn't know of betrayals or mortgages or unpermitted garages. She only knew warmth and heartbeat. Over the next 6 months we rebuilt, slowly, unevenly. Dinner once a month, cautious at first, laughter awkward but real. Apologies folded into conversations like salt into stew. Sienna, to her credit, changed. She set an extra plate without being asked. She asked me about my work and she listened. The barbs disappeared from her voice. Pain had tempered her the way fire tempers steel. Noah began making decisions on his own, no longer leaning on me as if my presence were a crutch. He seemed to understand now that my strength was not infinite, not free. We were a smaller family than before, but stronger in the ways that mattered. A year passed. I turned 66 in my apartment with sun-warmed windows and shelves lined with books I'd had time to read at last. I worked part-time for Adrian Still, inspecting properties, writing reports. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it reminded me that life had not ended when Noah and Sienna shut the door on me. It had only begun again on my terms. Lila's first word came on a Tuesday morning over mashed bananas in her high chair. She looked at me, eyes bright as marbles, and said, "Gamma." The word cracked something open inside me. I cried, messy and unashamed, because she had no idea she'd just rewritten my story. In that small syllable, she made me more than the discarded mother, more than the consultant, more than the woman who'd had to teach her family about consequences. She made me Gamma, someone irreplaceable. That night, I stood at my window, city lights blinking like watchful stars, and whispered to my reflection, "Sometimes the best revenge is refusing to be anyone's victim again." I finally understood that family isn't about endurance, how much hurt you can swallow, how much silence you can bear. It's about requirements. It's about boundaries. It's about saying here and no further. And in that understanding I was free. The rain came down steady that morning, painting the streets in bruised reflections. I'd just finished steeping tea when my phone vibrated against the counter. Unknown number. "This is Eloise Hart." A measured voice answered. "Mrs. Hart, this is Patricia Daniels from First National. I'm Noah's mortgage officer. He listed you as his emergency contact. I'm calling about a situation." My stomach tightened. What kind of situation? She explained with professional detachment, though her words twisted like knives. Noah had applied for a home equity line to cover unexpected expenses. The assessment flagged the converted basement. No permits, no documentation. Until the property met code, the bank would not approve additional lending. "Your son mentioned you might assist with compliance," she added carefully. "He said you had construction management experience." I almost laughed. Construction management? I'd been a secretary, a homemaker, a mother. Noah had spun me into a superhero for a loan officer because desperation makes liars of us all. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said coolly. "I'm not in a position to help." Patricia hesitated, then ended the call. I stood in my kitchen, hands trembling around my teacup. Even now, after everything, Noah still assumed my life existed to plug the holes in his. Moments later, his name lit my phone. "Patricia said you refused to help." His voice was a whip crack. "I didn't refuse," I corrected. I clarified. "You promised you had everything arranged, the 8,000, the contractor." "I had it arranged when I believed I was family. That arrangement died when you pushed me out." "This is insane," he barked. "You're destroying us over hurt feelings." Something broke loose inside me then, sharp and final. "Feelings? Noah, I sold my home for you. I lived in a basement and paid rent to my own son. I cooked, cleaned, endured your wife's contempt. And when I needed respect, you threw me out. Now you come crawling back and suddenly I'm family again. The silence on the other end was deafening. The following Saturday my doorbell chimed. Through the peephole, two figures I hadn't seen since Noah's wedding, Gerald and Marianne Pierce. Sienna's parents. I opened the door, curiosity outweighing annoyance. Gerald. Marianne. To what do I owe the honor? They shuffled inside, damp from drizzle. I poured coffee and waited. Gerald wasted no time. Dorothy, excuse me, Eloise. We need to talk about the house situation. About Noah and Sienna. Marianne clasped her hands tightly around the mug I gave her. Sienna's 8 months along. The stress isn't good for her or the baby. I raised an eyebrow. What did she tell you? They exchanged a glance. That you moved out after disagreements about privacy. That you felt excluded from baby planning. That you were upset they wanted to use the basement as the nursery. So that was her story. I bit back a laugh. According to her, I was a bitter, oversensitive relic clinging to space she needed. Convenient. Would you like to know the real story? I asked. Without waiting, I opened my kitchen drawer and retrieved the folder. The city's notices, the estimates, the timeline I'd carefully assembled. I laid each page out like evidence in a trial. I told them about the violations, my plan to pay for compliance, the exact words their daughter had hurled. Useless, inconvenient, unwanted. Marianne's face blanched, tears filling her eyes. Gerald's jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. She called you useless? Marianne whispered. Among other things, I said. Gerald slammed his palm on the table. We raised her better. She should never. People change when cruelty becomes easy, I cut in. Comfort makes cowards of some. Marianne's voice trembled. Eloise, what will it take to fix this? Not just the house, this family. I looked at her, saw the sincerity. Some things don't fix. Some things scar. They left with rain dripping from their umbrellas and shame heavy on their backs. For the first time in months my chest felt light. Peace lasted less than 48 hours. Adrian called, tension back in his tone. The city received a formal complaint. Allegations that Cole and Rowan coerced families into selling. They're launching a review. And who filed it? Asked though I knew. Gerald Pierce. Your daughter-in-law's father. I should have seen it coming. Of course Gerald, stung by guilt, would attempt to shield his daughter by aiming at me. That same afternoon, Detective Chen's number appeared again. Mrs. Hart, we need to schedule a second interview. This is time-sensitive. I found myself in the same sterile conference room, the same watchful eyes pinning me. Mrs. Hart, Chen began, you recommended your own son's property for acquisition. Why? Because it met the criteria. Unpermitted work, financial strain, potential for redevelopment. My assessment was factual, not vindictive. After being asked to leave the property. Yes, that part is true. But Cole and Rowan were already evaluating the block. Whether or not I spoke, they would have found 218 Rosemont. My role was honesty. He studied me, weighing truth against suspicion. Some people would call that revenge. I leaned forward. Detective, revenge implies malice. What happened was consequence. My son and his wife made a choice to discard me. They also chose to cut corners on their home. Actions echo. I didn't design the echo. I just refused to silence it anymore. 2 hours later the interview concluded. As she escorted me out, Chin paused. Off the record, Mrs. Hart. You don't strike me as vengeful. But you do strike me as dangerous to anyone who underestimates you. I met her gaze. That would be accurate. Days passed. My nerves frayed, nights stretching into hours of pacing and staring at the ceiling. Then Adrian called again, voice brighter than it had been in weeks. Good news, Eloise. The city closed the investigation. No evidence of fraud or coercion. Your role was cleared. And the complaint? Withdrawn. Gerald called personally to retract. Apparently he had conversations with his daughter. Strong ones. I let out a shaky laugh. So he finally realized where the real betrayal lay. That afternoon, another knock rattled my door. I looked through the peephole. Noah and Sienna. Both looked ravaged. Their skin was pale, eyes hollowed, shoulders heavy. They weren't here to demand. They were here to beg. I opened the door, leaning against the frame. Mom, Noah whispered. We're sorry. Sienna nodded, tears already streaming. We didn't know. We didn't understand. You tried to protect us. And we threw it all away. Their remorse was raw, but pain still clung to me. I'd carried their betrayal in my bones for too long. I can forgive, I said slowly. But forgiveness doesn't erase truth. You showed me who you were when you thought cruelty was safe. I'll never forget that. Noah's voice cracked. Can we ever be a family again? Maybe, I said. But only a family rebuilt on respect, not convenience. You'll have to prove yourselves with actions, not apologies. They nodded desperately like children clutching candy, but I wasn't swayed by desperation. Words were cheap. Time would tell. The sale went through 2 weeks later. Adrian's firm purchased 218 Rosemont for $460,000. After debts and closing costs, Noah and Sienna walked away with $65,000. They bought a modest house across town, small but affordable. For once they stood on their own legs, not mine. Months passed. Lila was born, tiny and pink and loud. They didn't name her after me, but when I held her, none of that mattered. She gripped my finger with her impossibly small hand, and I cried because she was untouched by the poison of our past. Dinner invitations trickled in, cautious at first. We shared meals, tested laughter, built fragile bridges. Sienna softened, she stopped weaponizing her stress. Noah learned to solve problems without reaching for me like I was a safety net. I stopped letting guilt decide my choices. On Lila's first birthday, she pointed at me, eyes bright, and said, "Gamma." The room stilled, and for once, joy flooded instead of pain. I realized then, the revenge wasn't the sale, the investigation, or even the profit they lost. The real revenge was living free, proving that I was more than a burden, more than someone's backup plan. I was Eloise's heart. Independent. Whole. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people drown in the waters they chose. Only then will they learn how to swim. And sometimes the sweetest justice is not destruction but survival. The first time I walked past Rosemont after the sale, the house looked like a paused breath. The porch light hung crooked, a little rectangle of adhesive where the old family name had been peeled from the mailbox. A survey flag shivered in the yard, neon as a fresh bruise. I told myself I'd just come to see the river, how the afternoon sun cut it into silver shards, but my feet slowed at the curb anyway. Memory is a rude host. It drags out old chairs and insists you sit. Across the street, Ms. Rowe shuffled down her steps with a paper bag and a stubborn kind of dignity. She wore her cardigan like armor, white hair pinned in a tidy coil. "Eloise," she said as if she'd called me yesterday to borrow sugar. "Your boy moved." "Across town," I said. "Smaller place. Better fit." She nodded, eyes skimming the survey flags like they were strangers at her fence line. "They say the street's getting upgraded." Funny word for being told to leave the house you painted twice with your own hands. She lifted the bag. "Canned peaches. Sale at Dwyer's." I bought 6 and then remembered I live alone. Still shopping for ghosts, I guess. Her smile wasn't unkind. It landed on me with the weight of a question. Who have you become, standing beside the people who helped the tide rise? That night, when Noah dropped Lila off for 2 hours, "Just a nap, Mom will be back before she wakes," I watched her sleep in the bassinet by my window while guilt scrolled its headlines behind my eyes. I thought about the folder in my kitchen drawer, the neat stack of proofs that had saved me and drowned someone else. I thought about Ms. Rowe's hands, a map of work. I thought about the steady thrum in my chest that used to be fear and had become resolve. When Lila's eyelids fluttered, I put a finger on her palm. "Little bird," I whispered, "I'll teach you the whole truth. Love without boundaries is just erosion." She squeezed back, reflex more than promise, but it steadied me. In the quiet, I made a decision I couldn't unmake. Tomorrow I would call Adrian, not as a consultant eager for a fee, but as a woman who refused to let progress flatten every human shape it touched. The community meeting took place in a fluorescent-lit rec center where the floor smelled faintly of mop water and ancient basketball. Folding chairs made a nervous half-moon facing a plastic table. On one side, Adrian and his project manager with crisp renderings of Rose District. Clean lines, cafe patios, cheerful trees that never drop leaves. On the other, neighbors in raincoats, their voices low and braided with worry. A woman with a baby on her hips stood. "Your flyers say, neighborhood renewal. My lease says month to month. Which do I believe?" A man in a volunteer fire department sweatshirt muttered. They call it revitalization so they don't have to say the word that tastes like rust. Someone recognized me. That's the consultant, a voice said, sharp as a bottle edge. She sold her own kid's house. A ripple moved through the room. Accusation has a way of finding purchase even when it's only half true. I stood anyway. Fear had kept me polite for years. I was tired of being polite. My name is Eloise Hart, I said. I work with Cole and Rowan. I also lived on Rosemont. My son did too. I care about these blocks the way you do, by memory, by habit, by heart. Adrian's eyes flicked toward me, warning disguised as patience. I ignored it. You can line a street with pretty cafes and call it progress. But if you rip people out by the roots and tell them it's gardening, don't expect them to thank you. So here's what I'm asking for, publicly. I listed them, voice steadier with each word. A relocation stipend scaled to tenure. Free permit clinics to bring conversions into compliance without bankrupting families. Hardship extensions for seniors. A partnership with a credit union to offer low-interest rehab loans. And a hiring commitment, local first, for construction, maintenance, retail. A murmur rose, part hope, part disbelief. Adrian shifted, then smiled in the way men smile when they're negotiating the terms of surrender without admitting defeat. Ambitious, he said softly. Necessary, I said. Or I resign. And I will make every call I know how to make to tell this story right. From the back, a familiar figure stepped forward. Sienna, hair pulled into a knot, eyes rimmed red but clear. Noah hovered beside her, one hand on her shoulder. We support this, she said. The room tilted a fraction. The past and present shook hands. For the first time since I'd moved my boxes out of that studio, I felt something unclench. A hinge finally quailed. Detective Chin stood against the far wall, arms folded, expression unreadable. She didn't intervene. She just watched like a witness who suspects the truth is finally walking into the room. Adrian called the next morning, voice trimmed to diplomacy. You surprised me, Eloise. Then you haven't been paying attention, I said. I didn't survive this year to become the kind of woman who apologizes for having a spine. He sighed, paper rustling. We can do a relocation stipend, capped. We'll host clinics. The hiring commitment, fine with qualifications. The loan partnership is messy. I've already spoken to Franklin Mutual, I said. Community reinvestment requirements. They're eager for a headline that sounds like redemption. I wasn't bluffing. After the meeting, I'd walked 2 blocks in the rain and asked to see the branch manager. Motherhood teaches you 2 things. When to be gentle and when to go through the back door. Adrian laughed under his breath. You're relentless. I'm consistent, I said. If we're building something new, it will not be on top of old people's chests. That afternoon Sienna texted, Can I come by? Alone. It startled me that she asked and I said yes. She stood in my doorway like a woman who had been walking uphill in sand. We made tea and didn't speak for a full minute. When Lila was born, she said finally, I couldn't sleep. Not just newborn tired, terror tired. What if I dropped her? What if I looked away and she vanished? And I looked at you and saw, not help but proof of everything I wasn't. I turned that into anger. It was easier than admitting I was afraid. There it was, something raw and honest, laid on the table like a broken plate waiting to be mended or thrown away. Fear is a terrible sculptor, I said. It carves us into sharp things. I'm sorry, Eloise, she whispered. Not because I need something. Because I broke something. I thought of Ms. Rowe counting peaches, of survey flags, of Noah's note trembling under my door. I thought of the word I'd given them, maybe, and how maybe often grows in shadow, not sunshine. I reached for Sienna's hand. Here's the boundary, I said. I will hold the baby, not the mortgage. I will show up for birthdays, not bank appointments. I will love you, but I will not disappear inside your needs. She nodded, tears sliding clean lines down her cheeks. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Inside, something steadier, like a metronome, began to keep time. The storm arrived exactly when the weather app promised it wouldn't. Wind shouldered the city. Rain came slantwise, welding sky to ground. By midnight, the power flickered, surrendered, and the building exhaled into dark. My phone buzzed on battery. Noah. 3 words. We lost heat. I stared at the screen. Boundaries are easy under clear skies. The test is thunder. Text me your thermostat reading, I wrote back. And Lila's temp. 15 minutes later I was driving into weather with my emergency kit thrown in the back seat. Space heater, blankets, a stubborn flashlight that had outlasted 2 hurricanes, and a pot of chicken soup that had no business being as steady as it was. The streets near their new house pooled water in the dips. I parked at the top of the block and walked the rest, rain slicking my face, my coat heavy as regret. On the corner someone slipped. A small cry. Ms. Rowe, of all impossible intersections, stood hunched under a thin umbrella that had given up on being useful. "Heat's out," she said, embarrassed to be caught shivering. "I heard your boy moved nearby. Thought I'd knock. Foolish. I should have stayed put." "Not foolish," I said, tucking her hand into my elbow. "Practical." We detoured to Noah's door together, the 3 of us suddenly an odd procession. Past, present, and the woman learning to be both. Inside, Sienna held Lila against her chest, layered in sweaters, fear bright in her eyes. The air was cold enough to make breath visible. "We called the landlord," Noah said. "He's stuck behind a downed tree." "I brought a little sun in a pot," I said, setting soup on the gas stove and coaxing flame from the match like a secret. Blankets unfurled. A battery lantern turned each face into a painting. We sat shoulder to shoulder around the coffee table while the storm hit the windows with both hands. Ms. Rowe told a story about the winter of '79 when she'd kept pipes from freezing by singing to them like stubborn children. Noah laughed, the sound sudden and unfamiliar in the dark. Lila slept, cheek spat against Sienna's shoulder, breath sweet as a promise. For a thin sliver of night the house learned how to be a shelter. Later, when the heat kicked back with a grudging sigh, Noah took my coat at the door. "You came," he said quietly. "I did," I said. "Notice what I brought." "Soup," he said, smiling a little. "Not solutions." "Exactly." 2 weeks later, Cole and Rowan announced the Rose District commitments, in a press release that sounded like it had been written by a person who still believed in good endings. Relocation stipends with tenure multipliers, quarterly permit clinics, a hardship extension for residents over 65, the credit union partnership inked with signatures neat as stitches, and a local first hiring pledge that turned construction sites into neighborhood reunions. Reporters snapped photos of Adrian shaking hands with the councilwoman. He made sure I stood 2 steps to the side, not center frame. I didn't mind. The work mattered more than the picture. At the first clinic, Ms. Rowe arrived with a folder tied with kitchen twine. We sat together while a volunteer engineer traced her options. Modest upgrades, a timeline that respected Social Security checks, a plan that didn't require a miracle. "I can stay through spring," she said, as if the season itself had been returned to her. "After that, maybe my sister in Port Haven." She looked at me. "You didn't make promises. You made space." Lila's handprints began to bloom on my refrigerator like a private museum of moments. Blue paint smudges, a macaroni sun, a crayon oval that Sienna insisted was Gamma's house. On a Saturday market morning, Sienna slipped her arm through mine and asked how to make my biscuit recipe rise higher. On a Tuesday, Noah called about a leaky faucet and then caught himself. "I'll Google it," he said. "And I'll text you if I want company, not rescue." The city mailed me a letter on heavy paper, an acknowledgement of community advocacy in developmental transition. I tucked it in a drawer beneath the folder that used to live like a buried weapon and now felt like a retired soldier. On the anniversary of the night I carried my boxes down the studio stairs. We ate dinner at my apartment. Chicken, greens, cornbread that had finally learned how high to rise. Lila toddled toward me triumphant and pressed her forehead to mine. "Pine Gamma," she declared, small and fierce. I laughed, not because she was wrong but because of the sentence inside the sentence. I belonged to myself first, and still there was enough left to belong to others, properly without vanishing. I looked at my family, smaller, truer, and at the window where dusk folded itself into the river, and I felt the joy of a boundary held like a bright line on a map. Revenge had long since stopped being my engine. What moved me now was a quieter power, the courage to require what love should have always given freely: respect, reciprocity, room to breathe. And in that light, the city didn't look like a machine anymore. It looked like a quilt, patched, repaired, warmed by many hands. The winter thawed into early spring, and with it came the city's first signs of transformation. Sidewalks were marked in spray paint, Utility trucks lingered on corners and scaffolding sprouted like odd metal trees. Rosemont was changing whether anyone liked it or not. Noah called one afternoon to ask if I wanted to meet at the park. When I arrived, he was already on the bench, shoulders hunched as though he were still carrying that old guilt like a backpack too heavy to take off. Lila toddled in circles, chasing a pigeon that strutted as if the world belonged to it. "I keep thinking about what you said," he began. "That you won't hold our mortgage, only birthdays." That hit me harder than I admitted. All those years I thought being a man meant carrying less because you always carried more. His words startled me. Not because they were new but because they were honest. "I leaned on you too hard," he confessed. "Not just for money but for answers. I treated you like my safety net instead of my mother." The wind lifted strands of my hair. I didn't fill the silence for him. Letting people sit in discomfort is sometimes the only way they understand the shape of what they've done. "I'm trying to do better," he said at last. "I've started a savings plan. Fixed that leaky faucet on my own. And when the roof needed patching, I hired help instead of dialing you. Progress small but real." I looked at him, not with pity, not with resentment, but with a cautious kind of pride. "That's all I've ever wanted, Noah. For you to stand without crushing me in the process." Lila ran up then, breathless with laughter, her cheeks flushed from the chase. He pressed a daisy into my palm. "For Gamma," she announced. I closed my fingers over it, a fragile stem carrying the weight of an entire new season. Sienna came by alone a week later, carrying a tin of cookies she admitted she'd burned the first batch of. We sat at my kitchen table, the one she used to glance at with disdain, and ate them warm and imperfect. "Do you know the part one regret most?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "There's competition?" She winced but pressed on. "I told myself you were old-fashioned in the way. That by pushing you out I was making space for my own life. But what I really did was shrink my own heart to fit my fear." I sipped my tea, letting her words settle. "Fear will make a liar out of anyone," I said. Her eyes filled. "I can't change what I said. I can't change that you heard it. But I can change what comes next." We talked for hours. Not about the house, not about the fight, but about recipes, childhood memories, and the strange, twisting road of motherhood. She told me about her own mother, Marianne, strict yet protective, and how hard it had been to live in her shadow. I told her about Noah's first steps, about the nights I worked overtime just to afford his asthma medication, about the loneliness of being the only adult in a house where bills outnumbered toys. By the time she left, the tin was empty and something had softened between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but a crack in the wall where light could pass. At the door she turned and said, "I want Lila to know you as more than the woman we wronged. I want her to know you as the woman who made us better." It was the first time her words felt like a promise instead of an excuse. The redevelopment moved quickly. By summer, Rosemont was nearly unrecognizable. Sleek facades replacing peeling paint, coffee shops rising where old laundromats stood, families packing up decades of memory into cardboard. Adrian insisted the transition was seamless. But seamlessness is a word spoken by those not losing their footing. Still, the community programs I'd fought for made a difference. At the relocation clinic, I watched Ms. Rowe sign the paperwork for her stipend, her hands trembling as if she were holding more than just documents. "This buys me time," she whispered. "Time to decide instead of being pushed." One evening, Adrian invited me to a rooftop launch party for the Rose District. The skyline glittered, champagne flutes clinked, and developers spoke about vision and legacy. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, but enough to remind myself I was not invisible. When Adrian raised his glass to toast, he nodded in my direction. "And to Eloise Hart," he said, "who reminded us that progress without compassion is just demolition." Applause rippled, polite but genuine. Afterwards he leaned toward me. "You were right," he admitted. "Compassion sells better than arrogance. Don't let that go to your head." I smiled because the truth was already lodged in my bones. It wasn't about selling, it was about saving. And for once I felt like I'd managed to do both. Later, standing at the railing, I called Noah. I could hear Lila babbling in the background. "We're watching the fireworks on TV," he said. "Look out the window," I told him. "They're real." And for the first time in a long time, we were looking at the same sky, even from different rooftops. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings and the smell of wood smoke drifting down side streets. Lila was walking now, unsteady, bold, reckless in the way toddlers always are. She came barreling into my apartment one Saturday, arms open, cheeks pink, shouting, "Gamma!" like it was the password to joy. We baked together that afternoon. She stood on a chair, her small hands patting flour into a mess while I guided gently, resisting the urge to correct. Struck me then, this was the gift of boundaries. Because I had refused to vanish, I could now choose presence. I wasn't here out of duty or debt. I was here because I wanted to be. That evening, after Noah picked her up, I sat by the window with my journal. I wrote, "Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't that people can betray you. It's that they can love you badly. And if you let them, they'll keep doing it. But if you demand better, sometimes, miraculously, they rise." The phone rang. It was Sienna. "Thank you for today," she said. "For loving her. For loving us even when we didn't deserve it." I closed my eyes. "Love isn't the problem," I said softly. "Respect is. And I think you're learning." Silence hummed between us, but it wasn't hostile. It was the silence of bricks being laid in a new foundation, slow and steady. On the anniversary of Lila's birth, we gathered again. This time not in a hospital room filled with tension, but in my apartment, warm with the smell of roasting chicken and cinnamon. Friends and family filled the space, laughter bouncing off walls that once knew only solitude. Lila sat in her high chair, chubby fingers reaching for cake. When she smeared frosting across her cheeks, everyone erupted in laughter. Noah leaned back, eyes wet, and whispered, "We're finally okay, Mom." Sienna stood beside me, not as a rival, not as a gatekeeper, but as a woman who had walked through her own fire. She placed her hand over mine. "You gave us a second chance. We won't waste it." I believed her. Not because she said it, but because I had learned to listen to actions over words. Later, after everyone left, I cleaned the dishes in quiet satisfaction. My apartment, mine, always mine, glowed softly. I paused by the window, watching the city breathe, and thought about everything that had happened. Betrayal, exile, consequence, reconciliation. I realized then that the story had never really been about losing a house or even gaining respect. It had been about claiming my own worth and refusing to let anyone measure it for me. At 66, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Working, loving, demanding respect, and still leaving space for tenderness. Lila's giggle echoed in my memory, sticky with frosting and light. That sound was proof. I had broken the cycle. Sometimes revenge is loud. But sometimes it is quiet. The simple refusal to be erased. The steady insistence that love must come wrapped in respect. And in that quiet I found not just victory but peace.